Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.
In the aftermath of the tragic mass shooting that took place at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, many are looking for an answer to the question of why it took law enforcement over an hour to deal with the situation regarding the mass shooter, Salvador Ramos. And many more are asking the question, why didn't the Uvalde Police Department engage Salvador Ramos, and why did it take federal Border Patrol agents to go out here and confront and kill the shooter after he took the lives of 19 children? Now, many in law enforcement, according to their official reports, say that they were told to not engage the shooter because they were told that the situation had changed, and because the situation went from an active shooter to an individual who was contained in a classroom. And the officers in the Uvalde Police Department are saying that is the reason that they held back and did not engage the suspect, Salvador Ramos, and waited for other instructions. But when I take a critical examination of this entire incident where these police officers did not engage Salvador Ramos, it's looking like the flip side as related to the pattern and profile of beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. Now, in my previous videos talking about mass shooter Salvador Ramos, I talked about how this beta male was motivated to commit the murders of these 19 children due to the fact that his life had been falling completely apart and he had not been able to graduate high school. He did not have a functional family unit, and how he was having problems with his parents and his grandparents. Now, that's one side of what motivates beta males to participate in their violence, but on the other side of beta males is called cowardice, and this is what happened here, I believe, with those officers from the Uvalde Police Department. Now, when it comes down to beta males, in most situations, most beta males like to have the advantage where they can be able to have power in a situation. This is what motivates many mass shooters to go out here and attack people who they believe to be unarmed, such as children, like at the Robb Elementary School, old people and women and children, like the mass shooter at the Top Supermarket in Buffalo did, and many other venues that these mass shooters participate in. They like to have the advantage because they have the superior firepower and they have the superior advantage. And this is the same thing that goes on with what I believe with the Uvalde Police Department. They did not engage this mass shooter because they did not have the advantage in the situation, and because they saw that this beta male had a semi-automatic weapon, they feared engaging this individual. So what they did after he fired several shots when he was confronted, and several officers got grazed, I believe the higher up officers went out here, and what they did was they made, as I believe to be, an excuse, saying that, oh, we're going to try to deal with things on a technical level by using the rules to avoid engaging this individual, even though he was slaughtering children. And that's the type of cowardice that your beta males have. Many of your beta males, they are oftentimes big and tough when they have the advantage and the superior firepower, but when they go face to face with someone who has equal advantage with the weapon, that's when they want to start to go into technicalities as related to the rules of the law, and they use those technicalities as related to the rules of law to avoid engaging and confronting that individual because they fear having to deal with a conflict where they are on an equal footing with an individual who is armed with a weapon. So that's what I believed happened here as related to those officers and their commanding officers. They feared engaging this mass shooter because they themselves feared losing their lives and they feared winding up dead at the hands of the suspect. That's what I believe led to the delayed response from the administration in law enforcement. They did not want to go out here and engage this shooter because they feared that officers were going to lose their lives, and that just showed how cowardly, as I see it, those people in charge were. They didn't understand that it's a duty of a member of law enforcement to go out here and engage a shooter in a situation. When an individual goes out here and trains for the police department, they have to know that they are going to put their lives at risk, and they have to know that this is part of the job. And I believe some of the officers did want to go in, but the whole thing is the administrators did not want them to go in, and what they wanted to do was go out here and make a whole host of excuses to avoid engaging this shooter. And what they did was they went out here and put the shooter on the back burner so they could go out here and use things like trying to secure the building, trying to find keys, trying to use anything to avoid confronting this individual. And they did this for over an hour, and what happened sadly was 19 children wound up losing their lives. And sadly, what happened was not only were children shot, there were some that possibly could have had their lives saved, but sadly, those children wound up bleeding out because of this whole apprehensive approach to dealing with this shooter, which I basically believe was nothing but cowardice, because this whole approach to dealing with this shooter, again, it went against procedure, because under law enforcement, you have to engage this individual almost immediately, and you have to run right into the line of fire. But these officers who were at the top didn't want to do this because they just didn't have the courage to go in there. And this is what upset many of the parents of those children, seeing the men who were supposed to protect and serve their community being restricted from protecting and serving their community, and seeing these men being cowards, hiding behind their policies instead of standing up like men. Now, I talk about this whole way of men hiding behind policy in my ebook, Manginas. They look like men, but they act like ladies, and that's what happened here as related to the Uvalde department. They were hiding behind policy instead of going in and taking action to deal with this shooter. Now, this whole incident shows us the flip side as related to the weakness of the beta male. The beta male, usually when he's put in a position of power, he covets the power of that position, but when it's time for him to take responsibility for that position and take action that may be dangerous, that's when the beta male's fear kicks in, and that's when the beta male who talked real tough when he's out here on the streets turns into a coward because he can't face the whole idea of confronting conflict where he may possibly lose his life. And that's what happened here that led, sadly, I believe, to the deaths of many of those 19 children. We had a group of beta males in law enforcement who were afraid to confront a killer who was basically slaughtering children because they themselves feared losing their own lives, because they feared that they would not have the advantage in the situation, and they feared they would not be able to easily overpower this individual. Many of these individuals feared that they would die in this situation, and they feared it so much that they refused to engage this individual. So that's what I believed happened here, and this is a clear example of what happens when you put a beta male in a power position. When you put a beta male in a power position, like being a member of law enforcement, yes, they can go out here and enforce the law when they think they've got the advantage, whether it be with an unarmed citizen or with a black person who they believe they can have superior power over. They have no problem going out here and doing their job when it's somebody they believe is less than, but when it's somebody who is equal, they have an issue with it, and that's when the big bad tough officers who are wearing the body armor, like the SWAT teams and many others in Uvalde, that's when they start to fall completely apart, because now they're dealing with an individual that is out of their depth, out of their ability to confront, and out of then somebody who they feel powerless against. And that's the whole irony of this situation, because the beta male participating in this shooting, he's participating in this crime because he wants power, and these individuals who are supposed to be able to take power were feeling completely powerless in this situation. And that's what happened here, as related, I see it, to the reason why these officers did not engage this shooter. And that is even after these so-called officers had been taught all sorts of training. It wasn't about the training. The problem is many of these men out here were never raised and taught to be men, and understand that when you take a job like this, you have to understand that you have agreed to put your life on the line. And that's what these men, after they made this agreement, they found out the hard way. This is not the job for them. Now, the problem here is that many people probably thought, oh, this will never happen here. They took the whole situation as mass shooters for granted. They thought, oh, I'll just take this training and it won't mean anything. And sadly, because these people did not take the training seriously, this led to the deaths of many of those 19 children and 2 teachers in that classroom, because many of the individuals there thought, oh, this will never happen here, not understanding that all across the country we have been seeing an explosion of violence, because we have beta males all across this country who are extremely frustrated, extremely angry, and due to the COVID-19 lockdowns, the wires on these beta males have been cut, and these short-circuiting individuals, they have gone from becoming ticking time bombs to becoming landmines, and these men are exploding at an increasing frequency. This is something that law enforcement hasn't been talking about, because the mainstream media has not been talking about the man crisis, and they have not been talking about both sides of the man crisis, the beta male mass shooters or the members of law enforcement who are too afraid to engage because they don't know how to deal with beta males, and they're scared because they've never experienced an individual like this. I mean, most Americans don't know how dangerous these beta males are, because the mainstream media refuses to talk about them. And this is what happens, what you have happen in Uvalde. These officers were scared, overwhelmed, and terrified at the whole aspect of confronting a real-life mass shooter. And when they had to go into this situation, they went into technicalities to avoid engaging this individual. And sadly, this is what cost people lives. Now, your law enforcement is doing an investigation, but I can tell you that the real reason why those officers didn't go in basically was because they were afraid of dying, and as related to confronting this individual, because this individual had an erratic mind, they had high-powered weapon, and if he was willing to kill children, this is what put the fear into these officers of confronting this individual, and they had never confronted this type of terrorism in their lives. So they were afraid to engage this individual from the top to the bottom, and the only people who had courage were those Border Patrol agents who were federal and outside of state jurisdiction, and those federal agents, understanding their training, understood this individual was a threat to everyone as long as he was alive, and they were willing to go in and have the courage to engage him, and they had the courage to go out here and take him out. And that was possibly, as I see it, due to the training they received, and also due to the culture that they had. The whole those federal agents, they understand that if they don't bring down the suspect, they will be held accountable. And because they are being held accountable by the federal government, they knew that they had to go in and take out that individual. But that leaves a further black eye on the Uvalde Police Department, because it shows how the Uvalde Police Department basically was emasculated, because the men of that community who were working as officers could not protect the children in their community, and that is a major black eye on the officers in Uvalde, Texas. Here you are hired to do a job to protect and serve the community of Uvalde, Texas, and the men in your community could not even protect the territory of that community from one shooter who went after the most vulnerable in your community. And that is something that shows you that there really was something wrong with the way the men in that community were raised, because you would think at least one man, even if his commanding officer told him not to engage, would have the courage to go out here and engage this shooter and protect the people in his community, the people who were the most vulnerable, which were the children of that community. And again, that is the saddest part about this. And it shows me that, again, it wasn't a training problem. No, it was a masculinity problem. It was a manhood problem, because men of character would have put their lives on the line to protect the children of a community, and they would not have hid behind technicalities like rules related to situations, because that's what beta males go out here and do. Beta males go out here and hide behind technicalities and rules to avoid dealing with conflict. Masculine men understand that if there is a problem, they have to have the courage to go in and face that conflict, and they, even if they are afraid, they are going to stand and continue to confront it, because that's what men do. And that's what the whole situation in Uvalde, Texas shows me, as related to the flip side of the man crisis, how we have raised not only 2 to 3 generations of landmine beta males, but we also have a lot of beta males in administration and management who really are all about hiding behind technicalities and rules instead of confronting situations and working towards problem solving. That's a thing that really affects a lot of these beta males. They think if they hide behind the rules, they'll keep their jobs. But when it comes down to individuals like this, they are not fit for the job. And when I look at the Uvalde Police Department, it shows me many of the officers there are not fit for their jobs, because an officer who is fit for his job would not have no problem running into that situation and dealing with that beta male, because children cannot defend themselves, and they would understand that protecting those children and stopping this killer would be the first priority, not going around trying to look for keys, look for custodians, look for all sorts of administrative stuff. No, men go in and men solve problems, and men take care of problems. And again, it's a major embarrassment for an entire police department with a SWAT team to not be able to contain a mass shooter and deal with him. It's embarrassing when federal agents have to come in and do the job of a police department. It's embarrassing to all of those men because this basically says that these men cannot go out here and protect their own community. These men cannot provide basic protection. And it's an embarrassment to all of the men in Uvalde, Texas, that you have law enforcement that really does not understand what it means to be a man because you've been basically humiliated in the worst way. When federal agents have to come in from the federal government and do your job, that's emasculating all around for the men in that community. And that's something many people don't want to talk about as related to what happened with the Robb Elementary School. We saw all of these strong, supposedly strong men who were trained to deal with this situation, not able to solve the problem because they were possibly stuck in a beta mindset, and that beta mindset had them scared and looking to try to find a way out of dealing with the situation. And for over an hour, they didn't deal with the situation, and another group of men had to deal with the situation. And again, that shows us how the man crisis affects those, I believe, in law enforcement, because if you cannot enforce the laws of your community and protect those who need the most protection, children, then it shows how weak the men in that community are. And that's the whole thing that nobody wants to talk about because it brings us right back to what is the core of the problem with America these days. Again, this is not a gun problem that's leading to these mass shootings and the weak and ineffective response we saw at the Robb Elementary School from law enforcement. This is a family issue, and it has to do with the way we are raising boys to become men. Because the way we are raising boys to become men are making the kinds of males who on one side are participating in this extreme violence like your Salvador Ramos, and on the other side it is producing cowards like many in your law enforcement in Uvalde, Texas, who are too scared to go out here and engage. And when you have a civilization filled with these kinds of males, that civilization is in a dangerous place. And the reason why that civilization is in a dangerous place is because if your men cannot protect their communities from the most dangerous individuals, then that community is going to be open to being taken advantage of by invaders. Because when outsiders see that the men in the community cannot protect the community, they see that as an opportunity for them to gain an advantage. And sadly, that's what Uvalde, Texas has sent a message to the world with its response to this mass shooting. They have sent a message to the world that the men and women in law enforcement cannot protect Uvalde, Texas, because they just were too afraid to engage this beta male. And sadly, that's what happens when you put beta males in positions of authority. They cannot go out here and do the roles that they need to do because they don't know how to be men. They don't know how to work like men towards doing their duties as men. And this leads to people thinking that the entire community is vulnerable. And sadly, that's the message that has been, sent here. Now, the other part of this is, I believe, possibly racial, because most of the victims in this shooting and many of the members of this community were Hispanic. So I possibly believe that the response could been slow because many of the whites in the community didn't want to go out here and help out members of the Hispanic community of Uvalde, Texas. But that's an angle I see that possibly could be one of the reasons why they did not respond. But I believe the main reason why many of the officers were restrained was because primarily many of these were not men, these were males. And again, it shows us the flip side of the man crisis, because when you put a beta male inside of a position where they need to take power and responsibility, many of these males fall apart due to their fear of conflict. And this is why it is very dangerous to put a beta male in a position like law enforcement, because yes, they'll go out here and be able to take on anyone who they have the superior advantage to, or somebody who they feel is less than, like a black person. But when they are confronted with a serious conflict that is putting others at risk, like children, they don't have the courage, the backbone, or the stones to go out here and confront a dangerous individual and protect that community the way a man does. And that's why I say that this is another side of the man crisis in this country, and it shows how America has done a poor job of raising its boys to become men, because we have been raising males, and these males, yes, they can go out here and complete the training, but when they get into the real world, they just fall completely apart in a major crisis situation. And that's exactly what happened here in Uvalde, Texas. These males fell completely apart, and they show us how much worse the man crisis in this country is getting, because these males have not been raised to become men who can do the basic roles that God has established for men. They don't know how to go out here and protect a community. And this is what happens when you don't raise your boys to become men and understand the importance of protecting a community. They allow situations like this to happen because they don't understand that it's your job to protect those like the children in your community. And if you cannot protect the children in your community, you are putting your community in danger. And sadly, that's what happened here. And nobody wants to talk about this. They'll go into all of these technicalities as related to an investigation. But what we have here is a masculinity problem. And this masculinity problem is on both sides, with the shooter and with the law enforcement response. We have a masculinity problem, and that's part of America's man crisis, a crisis no one wants to talk about, because talking about the man crisis means we have to deal with the way we are raising boys to become men, and we have to deal with that basically changing the entire way America does its everyday life, because the way we are living today here in America is breeding these beta males, and these beta males, they are either going out here and participating in extreme acts of violence like mass shootings at an increased frequency, or we're having a response from those who are supposed to be in authority, which is just coming across as empty and weak, and again showing us that our nation is in crisis from both sides due to the fact that we have beta males in leadership, and those beta males are leading the nation into a bad place. And unless we go out here and acknowledge the man crisis here in America, we're going to see, sadly, more of this kind of violence, and even worse, more of these empty speeches from people like the president, these circular so-called investigations from those in charge where they deny responsibility, and we see these males continuing to go on in their extreme violence because we're not working on the solution to the problem, which is rebuilding this American family, restoring God's natural order, and getting men back on the road to being heads of households and stewards under God. We have a lot of work to do. Unfortunately, those in charge don't want to take that responsibility. They want to talk around the problem, and the problems revolve around the family, the way we are raising boys to become men, and the boys we are raising today are not becoming functional men. They're becoming dysfunctional males, and on one side, they're participating again in lots of this extreme violence like mass shootings, but on the other side, which is more dangerous, we have politicians, administrators, and bureaucrats too scared to confront the problem, too scared to take responsibility, and too scared to protect the American people from America's greatest enemy, the dysfunctional beta male it started to create back in the late 1960s, and 3 generations later, they're still not understanding that this beta male is a clear and present danger to all in America. Now, if you want to learn more about the dysfunctional behavior of beta males and how he's doing harm to society, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis on Smashwords, the iBook store, and Google Play. And if you want to see me do more men's issues videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and Kindle, Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Learn how to avoid predatory females like Instagram models and e-girls in their virtual con games with Stop Simping in Cyberspace. Get your copy of Stop Simping in Cyberspace in paperback and Kindle today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.